Hey, it's Dead Guy Cardboard. So, I want to talk about the different forms of acquiring sports cards, and that is collecting versus flipping versus investing. I want to define each one and give you some tips about each of the different forms or sectors of acquiring sports cards. Now, me myself personally, I've always been like a 90% collector, maybe an 8% flipper, and a 2% investor. But this year is a little different because card prices have absolutely exploded and it's become very expensive as a collector. So I've sort of changed that up a bit. This year I'm probably like a 45% collector in terms of all the cards I collect or I have acquired this year from my collection, and then 50% of the cards I've bought this year are for flipping, and then maybe 5% are for investing. Um, so I'm still a collector at heart, but this year is different for sure. Uh, okay, so let's get into collecting first, or being a collector. What is a collector? A collector is someone who buys a card for their PC or personal collection that they have no intention of ever selling. And if they were to sell it, it would be probably just to get a higher graded card of that same card, aka an upgrade, or if they just absolutely have to sell due to some sort of financial crisis or reason. Um, Collectors, of course, still want their cards to appreciate in value, but ultimately they don't care if it goes up or down. Um, Collectors, they buy cards to look at and appreciate for their history, their beauty, and their Americana. Here's an example of a card that I like. I bought as a collector because I love the look of it. And it's this card's in the 3,000 hit club registry for PSA, so I collect the 3,000 hit clubs. But I don't expect this card to go up in value. I honestly expect this card to go down in value over the years because it's just a very obscure vintage set that not too many people are aware of or I don't think care about. And if it goes up, that's great. If it doesn't, that's fine. I just love the look of this card, and he's in the 3,000 hit club. Um, Tips. So on being a collector. Go after cards of great eye appeal, and be willing to pay the premium if a card has great eye appeal. Example of this is this Frank Robinson PSA 7. So I paid more than normal PSA 7s go for at the time when I bought this card, because this card has such outstanding eye appeal. If you know anything about the 1957 Topps set, is it's very hard to get with no print marks, no surface marks, and well centered. And this card just looks outstanding for the grade. And I know that there's a chance that this card could go down in value. If 5 years the hobby implodes and prices crumble, this card could go for less than what I bought it for. If in 20 years baseball just really goes down in popularity, this card could go down in value. If no one cares about vintage cards in 25, 30 years, this card could go down in value. But I ultimately will still be happy with my purchase because I love the look of this card, and I'll love looking at it on the shelf someday with the rest of my vintage card collection. So as a collector, I highly recommend waiting for good eye appeal cards. This card in the background is another example. That's a PSA 7 Reggie Jackson rookie card. Just has outstanding eye appeal, well centered for the grade, and just really a dark color. And a card I did pay a little bit more for. Tris Speaker, another example. This is a outstanding looking Tris Speaker T206 rookie card, really dark colors. And T206s have always been popular. The values have gone up, but I'll be happy of having this card in my collection as a collector, regardless of if it goes up and down in price. If you're a collector, now is definitely not a good time to buy cards. My tip is just to wait out this crazy hobby storm we're having. Prices have just gotten so high across all sports. I just don't think it's a good time to buy as a collector. There's probably some cards out there that are a good buy, but for the most part, it's tough. But don't have FOMO. Don't have this kind of fear of missing out. I got to get this card before it gets too high feeling. Because the benefit of being a collector is you have time. Flippers and investors, they want to buy something quick. They're worried it's going to keep going up in price, up in price. But look at it this way: players regress as they age; they just get worse. I mean, that's just a fact. A person's athletic prime is generally considered to be 27. I mean, I'm in my 30s and I cannot perform the same way athletic-wise as I did in my 20s. You get some creaks, you get sore. It's just not the same. And when a player hits 30, they definitely lose a lot of their athletic ability. They just become slower. They're more injury prone, etc. So if you feel you've missed out on having these rookie cards for your collection, like from guys like Mookie Betts, Christian Yelich, or even Mike Trout, don't be discouraged, because in 6 to 7 years, these guys will be in their mid-30s and they might regress significantly. I mean, look at players like Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera. They're just shells of themselves, and their prices for their cards have gone down a lot since they're when they're in their prime and they're in their 20s. So you never know. These Mike Trout update cards are currently going for $3,000. Something can happen to Mike Trout. He could get injured. His skill level could go down. Who knows what happens? And his prices might go down. Yes, he might reach some big milestones. He might break some WAR records, but chances are, his playing style is going to go down. Even like a player like Mookie Betts, I read an article that players that are like shorter than like 5'10" tend to have even a harder time adjusting to older age in their 30s. So, Mookie Betts, I think, is 5'9". I mean, who knows if his ability is going to be the same. I heard it's harder for shorter players to, I guess, maintain their power when they're older. I mean, that may be true for Mookie Betts, but you never know. But my point is, don't feel like you gotta jump on these players because their prices keep going up, because they're gonna get older, and in their 30s, many of these players are not gonna be the same. I'll give you an example. I am a big Joey Votto fan. I'm a Reds fan. I've always wanted to pick up his 2002 Bowman Chrome Refractors and his 2004 Bowman Auto. But right now, those cards go for $300 to $500. They're just really expensive. And last couple of years, Votto has not played well. And he's getting up there in age. And in a couple of years, he'll be retired. And no one will be talking about him. He won't be a first ballot Hall of Famer. He might not even be a second or third ballot. I mean, he's a borderline Hall of Famer. And his card prices are going to go dramatically down once he retires, when no one's talking about him. And that'd be a great time for me to pick up his stuff as a collector. Okay, now we're on to flipping. The definition of flipping is when you only plan on holding onto a card for a year or less before selling, and usually a lot less, like planning on selling a card in a few months or even a week after acquiring it. Flippers generally deal with modern cards or players that are currently playing, because a big few games can dramatically increase a player's price. If Mahomes has a huge game, just one game, his card prices could go up. If Mookie Betts hits 3 home runs in a game, his prices could go up. Especially nowadays, it's almost like playing fantasy sports, where it takes one game for a card price to go up. Tips on flipping: don't buy cards to flip that you'll get attached to. If you love a player and it's just going to be harder for you to get rid of that card, you got to buy cards to flip that you just don't care about. Like, if you don't think this player is going to go on to make the Hall of Fame, buy that card to flip. Another suggestion would be to buy from a different sports category. If you're a basketball fan, buy baseball cards to flip. If you're a baseball fan, buy basketball cards to flip. Or like this Top Sapphire card I got for the sole intention of flipping. I love Fernando Tatis. I watched every single Padres game this year. He's so much fun to watch, but I personally don't want that. That card costs a lot to get initially, and I don't want a card that expensive, a modern card that's that expensive in my collection. I'd rather spend that kind of money on a dream vintage card. But I do know that card could go up in price, because Sapphires are very collectible. They're like the key card to get for rookies and modern players nowadays. But I'll have no attachment to that card, because, again, I don't want that expensive of a card that I paid a lot of money for to be in my collection. I just rather have, spend $1,000, $2,000 on a vintage card than a modern card. Um, the best way to make money flipping is grading. Okay, like if you're buying 10 to 20, a $10 to $25 raw card, you can turn that into a $200 to $300 card if you get it graded. That's just an incredible ROI, a return on investment. Even if you calculate grading fees and chances of getting a card back in a PSA 9 or below, it's just crazy right now. I mean, even a PSA 9 sells for a lot of money right now. You could pick up let's see, a Tatis is I think $25 to $30 raw, and if that comes back a PSA 10, that's like I think a $250 card. That's crazy. So I would look into grading cards and getting good at looking at cards online. When I'm looking at cards online, I always look at centering first, and then I looked at the corners, and I always try to look at the back. If a seller doesn't have a picture of the back of the card, I request a photo of the back of the card because there might be something wrong in the back. And then things you can't really look at is the surface. So when you get it in the mail, just look at the surface. I'm not a big grader, but I know you can make a lot of money in flipping if you grade cards. If you get it, grade it, and immediately sell it. Another tip is if PSA 10s are too expensive, actually consider buying True Gem BGS 9.5s. And True Gems are if all the subgrades are at least 9.5. There's a somewhat of a good chance that if you crack that out, that it could come back a PSA 10. And what's nice about BGS slabs, they're great for cracking because once you crack it, basically already has its own penny sleeve built into the card, so you have less chance of damaging the card when you crack it versus trying to crack a PSA or an SGC case. Okay, now we're on to investing. The definition of investing is when you hold on to a card or card product for at least a year before selling. Social media nowadays, YouTube channels and Instagram, they're just being bombarded with investing in sports cards. I'll be honest, for the longest time, when I heard the word investment attached to sports cards, I would just kind of want to vomit in my mouth. You associate investing with the stock market and not sports cards. But I think the term investment can be something in the hobby. I want to explain how and also get on and give a buyer's beware opinion on investing in sports cards. The smartest asset you can invest in the sports card hobby is unopened waxed. Okay, like investing in hobby boxes, blaster boxes, you name it, is just usually the best bet. If you pick up the right products, they almost always go up in value if you wait at least a year to sell after its initial release. So you're holding this product and you wait for a year at least. That's an investment. Look for products that have multiple potential stars in them, that have rookies. A good example is the 2018 Topps update that has Soto rookie cards, Acuna rookie cards, Ohtani, Torres. So if one of those guys don't turn out to be good, you still have a backup like Soto or Acuna. Another good example is 2019 Topps Series 2. You have Eloy, Tatis, Alonso, and Vlad rookies in it. Example of a bad product to pick up is 2020 Topps Series 2. That only has Luis Robert in it as a key rookie card. So not a lot of people are going to want to rip open Topps 2020 Topps Series 2 in a year if all they can get is a Luis Roberts. I mean, you're better to pick up products that have a good rookie class in them. And in my opinion, trying to sell that box within a year or two. Why selling it within a year or two? Because if you wait longer, there's a chance that let's give Topps 2018 Topps update as an example. If Acuna starts sucking, Ohtani starts sucking, and Torres starts sucking, then all people are going to want out of that box is a Soto. But if you were to sell it now, all those players are still pretty relevant. Although Ohtani and Torres are getting less and less relevant. Okay, so another tip is if you're going to invest in current players, invest in players that have a high chance of reaching major milestones rather soon. Milestones can be, in baseball, is like a 3,000 strikeouts, 3,000 hit club, a 500 home run club, maybe the players nearing 70-plus career WAR, which once a player gets to 70 WAR, that's a good sign that they might get into the Hall of Fame. But these players are really few and far between. An example of a player that would be a good investment, in my opinion, would be Cabrera. His card prices are not the same as they were, and 5 to 10 years ago, but they're a pretty good value now because he has a very good chance of getting to 3,000 hits and 500 home runs next year. And he's pretty much a lock to get Hall of Fame. But once he reaches that 3,000 hit club milestone or the 500 home run club milestone, his card prices are going to go up. That happened with Adrian Beltre recently. Another tip is invest in retired players that have the most chance of reaching the Hall of Fame, especially players that no one have really on their radar. Everyone knew Derek Jeter was going to be inducted into the Hall of Fame, so his prices were already priced in and were so high to begin with. But a guy like Harold Baines, his prices were low because he wasn't on anyone's radar for getting into the Hall of Fame. But if you dig around on potential Hall of Fame blogs, blogs that talk about players that could have a good chance of getting in the Hall of Fame, Harold Baines was on a lot of those lists, so it wasn't a huge surprise. And that card could be had for nothing before he got into the Hall of Fame. And as soon as he went into the Hall of Fame, his card prices went up. I'm sure they're back down to being kind of low, but if you can find some dark horse Hall of Fame players that you can buy in cheap, and you can invest in those players, you can hold them for a couple years when you know they're going to be on the ballots or they're on the the Golden Era ballots for the older players. Look for those players to invest in. And the worst case scenario, if you're a collector, at least you have a good player in your collection. He might not be in the Hall of Fame, but a guy like Gil Hodges might never make the Hall of Fame, but he's a great player. And I might do a video soon about players that have a good potential of reaching the Hall of Fame that no one's talking about. Okay, another tip is zig when everyone is zagging. About 3 or 4 months ago, I was going to do a video of vintage basketball cards. I was going to acquire a couple and show them off, but my God, I missed the boat on that because card prices for vintage basketball have absolutely exploded. But that was an example of zigging when everyone was zagging. Vintage basketball cards have a low pop. They're going for very cheap. I remember I was looking at acquiring a 61 Fleer Oscar Robertson in PSA 6. I'm from Cincinnati. He played for the Cincinnati Royals. I just always wanted that in my collection. And I was too patient with that card because it's hard to find centered. And that card, I think, for the longest time, you can get that card in PSA 6 for $200 to $300. Then at the beginning of the year, it was like $400. I think now that card's going for like $3,000 to $4,000 in a PSA 6. So the basketball market caught on to the vintage basketball cards, and they realized that these are such short printed cards compared to Lukas and Zions and even 86 Fleer Jordans. Like, they're just a great deal. But that's an example of zigging when everyone's zagging. No one had thought about buying vintage basketball. Soccer cards have blown up in the last couple months, but that would have been a great example of zigging when everyone's zagging. Doing the opposite of what everyone else is doing. There's some people that made a lot of money on soccer cards because they realize soccer is the world's biggest sport. And if these basketball collectors that are collecting in Europe realize, hey, there's some soccer cards out there, I love soccer, that's going to blow up and those card prices are going to increase, and that's exactly what happened. So maybe an example of a sport or something that you could zig when everyone's zagging is tennis. It's not as big as soccer or really any other sports, but it's a pretty big global sport, and there's some great tennis cards out there. I meant tennis. Some great tennis cards to pick up out there. Another tip for investing is I would actually avoid investing in True Gem BGS 9.5s. Lately, in the last couple months, True Gem 9.5s are selling nowhere close to PSA 10s. Now, PSA 10s generally always outsold a True Gem BGS 9.5, but they're always pretty close in price. Now, like, there's just a big gap, and I think people are realizing that. I don't know. Maybe the PSA 10s really are way better than True Gem BGS 9.5s. I mean, it's just a common thing in the hobby where you get a True Gem BGS 9.5 and you think, oh, this would be a good PSA 10 candidate. Or maybe your card came back at PSA 9. You're like, oh, screw this. I'm going to send this to BGS. I could get a 9.5. So it seems like the trend is to pick up PSA 10s over True Gem BGS 9.5s. But like I said, for flipping, that could be a good opportunity to find some cards that are maybe good candidates to cross over to PSA 10 if you're flipping. But if you're going to hold a card long term, I don't know if I would invest in a True Gem BGS 9.5. Another tip is avoid investing in running backs in football, centers in basketball, and pitchers in baseball. They just don't hold up well in the hobby. Running backs get hurt a lot. Football has changed. It's no longer a running game. It's a passing game. The cards that typically go up in value are quarterbacks and wide receivers, but usually quarterbacks. Centers in basketball, there's just not a lot of love compared to the point guards and the forwards, some of the flashier players. And pitchers get hurt so often in baseball, and there's just so many pitchers that just sort of disappear. Tim Lincecum, Noah Syndergaard, Matt Harvey. They have some great couple years, and then they get injured, or they just lose their mojo, and they lose their values. It's always risky to invest in pitchers, but it's you can make money flipping pitchers. I mean, here's an example. I picked up this Dustin May Gold in a SGC 10. He probably will win the Rookie of the Year. So I would sell it right away because who knows what happens to him. Okay, so finally, in closing, only spend money on cards that you can afford to lose. If this is money you hope will help you pay rent, pay off bills, then just don't do it. This at the end of the day, basically, it's gambling, right? I mean, especially when you're investing or trying to flip modern players, where anything can happen to these players. They could have a horrific career-ending injury. They could get killed in a car accident. Who knows? The season could get canceled. Invest in baseball cards after you just have no credit card debt, and you've invested in a 401k, a Roth IRA, and/or a mutual fund. Then invest and/or flip cards. There's all these stories online about how cards are doing better than the stock market. Yes, that's true for a very select few cards, but overall the stock market is a safer bet. Art, coins, collectibles, cards will always be risky. Like I said, baseball cards are always an extremely risky investment. Flipping usually yields you a better results. Yes, you could have held on to a Trout Bowman Chrome auto, and it would have made you a ton of money, but that's just one example. Most players fizzle out if you hold on to their cards too long. I mean, look at Andrew Jones, Matt Kemp, Joe Mauer, etc. A profit is a profit. So if you make money off a card, you make money off a card. And I think what's kind of great now is if you're a collector, it's a great time to flip cards, to make money and put that back into your own collection. That's what I try to do. I try to flip some cards I don't really care about, the players I don't really care about holding on to for a long time, and using that money to buy my dream card. And right now, be careful. In the year, there's going to be a vaccine, and people are not going to be buying as much cards as they do now because there's just people can't go on vacations. They can't spend money on different things that they used to, and unemployment will be very high even after the vaccine. And 12 months ago, I mean, you could buy most base star rookie cards, not named Trout, for in the $60 to $150 range in a PSA 10. Now most of these marquee star rookie cards go for $200 to $300 in a 10, like Yelich and Acuna and Bellinger. But in a year or two, those prices could go way back down to $60 to $150. Finally, in closing, have fun, okay? enjoy what enjoy what you want to do, whether it's collecting, flipping, or investing. And also, let's not ruin this hobby for the younger generation. Don't take all the hobby boxes, blaster boxes, and hanger boxes from Target and Walmart. Let kids pick up these boxes. We got to think of the younger generation. And donate the cards you don't want to some kids. Don't act like Gordon Gekko on Wall Street. This is a hobby rooted in the love of sports, not just making money. And it's a fun hobby. I could honestly talk for hours about these 3 different sectors in the hobby. So feel free to ask me any questions. If you just remotely like this video, just please like and subscribe. That is it. Later.